So with that, I'm going to introduce our first panel. Our moderator for our panel today, for our first panel, is Kevin McLaughlin. He is a reporter at The Information. And I'm really excited for the panelists that we have for you. Two industry powerhouses in IT who have actually also worked together in the past. And so you're going to see two IT thought leaders who in many ways were also part of the same organization and part of the same team. And so the first panelist is Atlassian's very own Chief Information Officer, Archana Rao. Archana, please join us. Archana's team is responsible for really building and scaling our systems, processes, and capabilities within Atlassian, used across all of our business functions. She's worked in a series of some of the world's largest companies, and we're really privileged to have her as part of our company. Next, I'd love to introduce Sheila Jordan, who's the Senior Vice President and CIO at Symantec, the global leader in security. Great. Sheila is responsible for driving Symantec's information systems and technology strategy globally, operations throughout the world. And of course, like every IT and technology leader, spends a lot of time making sure that they have the right talent on board, the right organizational mix, and of course, creating and delivering value for the company. So please welcome all of them to the stage. Thank you.
Did we sit in the right places?
This is fine,
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin McLaughlin. I'm a reporter at a technology news website called The Information. We're based in San Francisco. We write about everything from enterprise technology to cloud computing to entertainment increasingly these days. So it's great to be here. I think this is a really interesting topic, and it's a very timely topic. Wanted to start off real quick. Slack had its IPO today, as Robert mentioned. It went quite well.
Yep.
They are claiming that they're going to replace email. And I'm just wondering, if you might talk a little bit, each of you might talk a little bit about what are the implications of that? Is that a good thing or a bad thing for CIOs?
My perspective is an awesome thing. Slack's a partner of Atlassian, and we have strong integration between our products. So we are a customer of Slack, and the company uses it just in all the ways that Robert talked about to team together, whether it's ad hoc teams coming together, Mountain View teams that are talking within Mountain View, San Francisco teams, like we have hundreds of channels where we communicate and collaborate and get work done. I was surprised coming into Atlassian, I don't get that many emails anymore. Most of that happens in Slack, and it's surprising to me that, earlier you would think of Slack as a way to have, real-time conversations, but Slack's also being used for kind of those out-of-band communication. Somebody will put something in Sydney, their morning time, I'm still sleeping, I wake up, I find it, and I reply to it. So it's become almost non-real time, where people are connecting with each other, getting work done. And the integrations to other products, like we very naturally go between Confluence to Slack to Jira to Google. So all of our systems are pretty well interconnected. So I do think that in the next decade or so, we probably won't use email that much.
So I couldn't agree more. Prior to my role, I was the Senior Vice President in charge of communication and collaboration technology at Cisco. So I've been with Symantec 5 years. And the reason I share that is because we tried hard to kill email 8 years ago. So, I'm super excited. I think email has become inefficient and almost like a dumping ground for everything and every kind of communication. So, and we also use Slack, so we're really super excited about what it does in the collaboration. So yeah, I think we've already seen a decline in email because of Slack, and I suspect that will continue.
Excellent. Well, I'm hoping that email goes away, because then my inbox will be somewhat decipherable.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. So the changing role of IT is a huge umbrella, and I think we can delve into only a few of the topics. But one of the things I wanted to start out with is this. One of the first big developments, at least from where I'm sitting, is this idea of developers and operation teams working together, which has been the case for several years. We now have entire companies being formed around this idea known as DevOps, which I think is kind of an annoying abbreviation, but that's beside the point. Can you just talk a little bit about the impact DevOps has had, on each of your respective businesses? And we'll start with you, Archana.
So, I'll talk about DevOps and Agile as I'm talking about this. Just more and more as IT starts moving your stack to the cloud, you're really leveraging more of your application and business capabilities than infrastructure capabilities, right? But as the provider of a cloud solution, as Atlassian is one of them, you also have to now run your product in the cloud. And that's where DevOps comes into play, where IT teams or infrastructure teams partner with the development teams to build together, not only build it, but run it, which has more been the IT realm, like build it and run it was part of our DNA. Now, as you see product companies turning into cloud companies, that's becoming part of the product DNA as well, right? You build it, you run it, and DevOps plays a strong role there. So the processes to move that changes into that product into the cloud are really leveraging all of the agile practices. So when teams come together and say, we're going to release this to the market, they have to work in unison. They can't work in like, you go do your own thing in the infrastructure world and I'll do my thing in the on the application side. You can't afford to do that today. There's multiple releases that go into production on a daily basis. So that asynchronous way of operating is no longer a viable thing. So we really need that synchronicity, which really forces the teams to come together and operate together as one.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Archana, but I think I'm going to take a higher order just because I think when you look at, we spend a lot of time on customer journeys. And a customer journey to me is the horizontal experience that they have with their company. So let's think of an app that you like. Pick an app. I happen to like the United app. And when you actually book a vacation, a family of 4 books an international trip, and you do all that information, you actually are touching the website, marketing, invoicing, payment, billing. You're touching horizontally across the company. So these customer journeys are horizontal. IT thinks horizontally. So when we go into this new subscription world, we're building these platforms that are completely, the product is, the invoicing and billing in the traditional corporate IT systems are an extension of the product. So that's what's happening in cloud world and in subscription. So it's kind of hard to think when there's no way you can't not work together and that kind of stuff when you're solving this incredible experience for our customers. So the customer journeys are horizontal, which means the company has to think and act horizontally and build those applications accordingly.
So I should explain why I find DevOps to be a little confusing, and that's because if you ask 10 different people, you kind of get 10 different answers. It's a very broad, complex thing, and it's also very difficult as a reporter to kind of write down what it is and why it's important in just a sentence or two. But I think that also speaks to its importance. Moving forward, I mean, is DevOps still, the fundamental core of IT transformation, or are we seeing other areas that are more kind of on the leading edge of this revolution?
Yeah, so I think DevOps is definitely a part, again, when you try and connect all these different disparate things together. But I think Archana's going to agree with me. I think what we've lost in the CIO world is how important the I is in information and data. Because when you have this incredible, many of you use your apps, and when you have an incredible experience on your apps, like I'm really addicted to Amazon, the shopping experience, not the public cloud, but the shopping experience. And when you can actually book a Windex to a generator in 6 minutes or less, on that they know everything about you, they know your credit card, the whole frictionless experience. So the ability to do that requires your data is going to be clean, knowledgeable, insights. You're using it in the process of the actual experience and in the transaction. So I think what we're going to see is an explosion of just the insights around data and how you use those in an actionable way. I actually think AI isn't artificial intelligence, it's actionable insights at scale.
Yeah, in Atlassian, we're a very data-hungry company. And I'm lucky, so I joined Atlassian a little over a year ago, and coming into Atlassian, I was just really, really impressed at what an amazing job the team had done in bringing all data in to our data warehouse. So we have high degree of completeness, we have really, really high degree of quality, and now you can really go up the stack and start building analytics and decision making and AI capabilities on top of that. So if you have a good solid foundation, that's the only way you can harness the power of data. And as IT, we are the keepers of that foundation. We take completeness and that quality really seriously. Anytime a new acquisition comes in, the first question is like, Is it feeding into Socrates, which is our data warehouse? Like that is that's how core data is to the company. But when you have that, what you can do is not only impact the customer journey, because you know your customer, you can tell them other customers like you do this, which is, the Amazon-like experience is incredibly valuable to customers because you really want to know that. Like, should I buy this or this? Should I buy this shirt or that shirt? Like, what about other people? What do they think? And having all of that available to you in the form of data is just what drives that customer experience. But not only that, when you see a customer is doing this, they like this, but they went to that, you can develop insights out of that from a product perspective and say, our product should operate differently. Our customer journey needs to look different. It isn't landing the way that we anticipated with our customers. So getting that data back on how customers use your product is become very valuable to companies. And companies that tap into that are the companies that are driving the success into today's marketplace. I completely believe that. So data, you're right. I think we got to anchor on data and really be good stewards of it.
Yeah, I think data is another huge piece we could talk about all day long. And Salesforce's acquisition of Tableau, I think, is one of the most sort of interesting to look at, because Tableau was out there for a long time, and Salesforce was interested in them for a long time. Now it seems that companies are really starting to pull the trigger on things that they've been thinking about for some time. My question is, why is data more important now, or why are companies sort of seeing it as more strategic now than perhaps 5 years ago? Because the cloud was here 5 years ago. This is not a new concept. Why is data becoming more important, I guess, is the question. We'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think it's because previously it was always transactional data. You're looking in arrears. Did I get my bookings, revenue, cost, and it's transactional. Because of the applications, because of how much we're doing on apps and in the customers are doing in the apps, there's all that information and data that we weren't necessarily including when you actually booked or called an order. So there's even more data around that. The second part is people are giving a ton of feedback, whether it's on Twitter or anywhere else. So with all due respect to anyone in marketing, I mean, listen to your customers, and you've got so many different social channels to listen to your customers to tell you, is the product working or not? You don't have to do that test and control study anymore. You don't have to go do all the things you'd have to go do and wait 6 months. You can actually go listen and see what their response is and go ask and get that kind of feedback fast. So I think the data is there's more of it. The timeliness of it is much more available, and the ability with the technology to actually tie that together and give you insights that you otherwise wouldn't get to see because they were in silos or in transactional systems. So the ability to tie all that together gives you some insights that you wouldn't have been able to easily recognize manually or just people. So the technology scale, there's more of it and there's more people participating. So I just would say that when you actually can pull this information together, it's so much more insightful. I think that it's giving you the insights that you otherwise wouldn't get.
And consumers are demanding it. They want data at their fingertips, right? I mean, most of us use our phones for all the data. Like we want, if someone says something, we're looking up Google, because just to verify. Or if there is an app, like, is my flight late? I'm not gonna leave and go sit in an airport if my flight's late. I wanna know now. So that consumer demand is just driving companies to offer that data up to customers. Usually, you would have no idea if your flight was late until you arrived at the airport and went to the gate and asked somebody. Today, you know that when you're home.
We're using the data to change the customer experience when it matters. So the timeliness of that. Here's your luggage is here, here's the flight's late, and they're texting you meaningful information when you need it. We couldn't do that before. It would be like you didn't know, or you have to go search for it. So now all that's available, that's all part of your arsenal now of data to be able to analyze.
Yeah.
So one last point here I'd like to explore is that there used to be kind of a silo between IT operations and developers, right? My experience with this is, in a previous life, I was a web designer 20 years ago, and I do remember needing to get a web server and going to the IT department and saying, I'd like a web server, and he's like, cool, come back next Tuesday. And so now, obviously, things have changed, and the cloud is the catalyst, but what was the cultural thing, not the technology, but what was the cultural hurdle that had to be surmounted there to make that happen?
I think it's like in the developer world today, the pace at which you're getting work done, you can't afford to do anything other than you build it, you run it, right? You're putting so much change into the system. You're the one who put it in. You don't have we don't have training schedules. We're going to take a month and train the operations team, and then you're going to build the next thing. That process has gotten so much more efficient that we're bringing those teams together, and they become part of a joint team where all of that happens together. You build it, you test it, you run it, and you go into that constant cycle, and you do it in small chunks, and you do it at velocity. Whereas back in the day, you'd put out one product release a year, and that'd be, oh wow, that's amazing. Today, people are putting out daily product releases and upgrades. How many upgrades do you get on your phone for all of the apps you have, right? Every time I go to my phone, I'm like backlogged on the amount of upgrades every one of my apps has gone through. That's the pace at which development is getting done. That's the pace at which consumers are consuming it. So that's the new trend, and it's not going away. It's only going to accelerate.
So I agree. I think there's three things. I think speed, the speed of which work is being done, and the expectation of the consumer for sure on both sides is at a different level than it was before. So you're not going to wait for anything. It's all about speed. I think the notion of IT historically was ingrained in us to be about perfection. We're so risk averse and so afraid we're going to mess something up or have the network go down or have an application fail that you spend so much time in planning the execution of something, and then the contingency plan, and then the contingency plan, and then the contingency for the contingency. So that's, you can't work in this world has changed, but you can't deliver with the notion of the essence of perfection. It really is about good is good enough, and go, and guess what? You get to go update it the next quarter, the next month, whatever. So speed, getting rid of the idea or the notion of perfection, and then it comes down to whether it's the developers in IT or anyone in IT or any other company, it comes down to trust. When people's roles and responsibilities, it's so simple, but when roles and responsibilities are clearly defined, this is your job, this is my job, we understand that, and you build trust about that. I think sometimes leaders don't spend the time in clearly articulating roles and responsibilities, and that, in my opinion, causes so much friction because you think I'm doing your job, and I think you're doing my job, and it's like we're never going to get that cleared unless that's defined. So defining roles and responsibilities and then building that trust every single day, do what you say you're going to do, and if you're not, communicate it. And I think that all of those things together are changing that relationship.
Yeah. Well, I think clearly DevOps has been this revolutionary force and has had a ton of great impact. I wanted to touch on one of the potential drawbacks, or not potential, like one of the drawbacks of the model is that anybody is empowered now to get cloud capacity. And of course, within companies, that's sort of led to problems with spending and cloud bills from public cloud providers being higher than expected. I'm not looking to mention any names of the companies, the cloud providers, but how do you kind of look at that side of things, and how has your thinking evolved over time with regard to giving the keys to people?
Well, so I'd say a couple of things. One is we are a user of AWS and Azure. AWS is where most of our products, security product, run on, and then we made a decision to move all of our corporate IT applications, 200 of them, to support our entire consumer business. So a $2.5 billion business is now running on Azure. So we made that decision. It was a 14-month plan. So a couple things we've learned a lot. One is, and I was told, the CIO community is really collegiate, and so when you're going to go embark on something, you call 12 of your friends and say, what do I do? What do I avoid? What are the pitfalls? And everyone told me, make sure you track the costs from day one, because the second you don't, it's almost like when you go travel internationally and you forget to turn your personal phone off, and you come back and you get that $1,000 phone bill and you think, holy smokes. So that can happen, but add a few more zeros in the cloud world if you're not careful. So understanding those cost structure up front, understanding it, tracking it from day one. We have these dashboards that we've done, and actually it helped us in the negotiations for the renewal because you knew how much you were spending on compute, hosting, whatever. So really managing it is super important. Now Microsoft has a great ELA structure, so it's easy to have that under one single ELA. AWS was a bit different. So initially that got a little bit where it was the developers were going off by themselves and getting that cloud compute. And we had to say, no, that can't work, especially in our environment where we're running security products, that can't be done that way. So we quickly got our arms around that to have a real governance around it. We're not trying to be the super police or controlling too much. It's just a governance to say, here's the effective use of cloud. Here's what runs, here's a product or an application that runs really effectively. We can actually see some of those applications that if you just did a lift and shift and didn't do some modification to the application, cloudifying, I call it. If you didn't do that, you just did a lift and shift, sometimes those applications won't work optimally. So understanding that, tracking it, is it taking up too much compute or storage? Do you not need premium storage for everything? So really understanding it, and once you've migrated to the cloud, you can't just forget about it. You've got to manage, operationalize it, optimize it. We got a small team of people that are doing that, and look even for the comparisons between clouds, because that's also pretty telling. So I would say that it's real if you have the sense that, okay, the cloud's done it, the infrastructure's done, it's gone, it's out of my view. You've got to, it's just an extension of your infrastructure and someone else is doing it, but you have to manage it.
Yeah, so infrastructure is not gone, it's there and you pay for it. You just don't have a separate team within your organization that manages it, right? So to me, in Atlassian, we have a networking team, which is pretty much what's left of the infrastructure team. But for infrastructure, we put the burden on each of the service owners. You're running your service, your job is to make sure you're as efficient as you can be, and you're being really responsible in how you use that service. Doesn't mean you can't experiment, doesn't mean you can't go get a few sandboxes, do innovation, drive change. That is, but putting the right ownership across the organization, so it just doesn't, there's no policing function. You can stand up an entire organization, all they do is govern the cloud spend. And if you do that, you've sort of failed, because nobody likes that job. Nobody wants to be a policing function within the organization.
Yes, I was talking to a company and they mentioned that they had contemplated putting some of their data scientists onto this specific task. And they were like, well, why would we deploy our talent in that way? But their costs were astronomical, so they actually looked hard at doing that. But and I think the other thing to mention here is that the cloud providers themselves are spending a lot of time on this issue, right?
Yes, they are.
They see
Yes,
it
they
as a problem,
Yes,
and
they are.
that says a lot about sort of they're meeting customers halfway on this.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
Yes.
having the visibility, having the tools that tell you, like, if I did this, what would happen? That's where the cloud providers are stepping in.
And the real value is, like, I have a really good relationship with specifically Azure, and Scott Gunther, who runs the Azure cloud. We meet every 6 weeks, and he's helped us through this whole journey. And the real value he helps us with is, here are 12 other customers that have done this, and this is what they look like, and this is what they're seeing. I know what we're doing, and I think, okay, we might be optimized, but when he can share with me to say, why don't we try and turn these knobs or do something different, or, because we were challenging, do we really need premium storage for all of our applications? The answer is no, you don't. But how to figure out which ones you do need and why, and go through that, we were able to leverage the other customers that were a little bit ahead of us, and that is so valuable.
So the next question is sort of based on the fact that both of your companies sell software that runs on public cloud providers as well as in private data centers. Mm-hmm. There's definitely been a movement in the industry that began last year where companies are increasingly focused on catering to companies that aren't ready to go full cloud. And Amazon was probably the most notable example. This year we've seen Google, Microsoft was also an early mover. How are you thinking about that, and what is the impact on your sort of IT planning to have these options available?
Well, so I believe in having a hybrid cloud strategy, just because I don't want to be held hostage by any one of them, and I like the cost pressures. They both know I use each other, and I like the ability to know the cost of each one of those and be able to move if I need to move. So that, one and of itself, I believe in healthy competition, and that's good. Two is our customers. We have a lot of federal customers and government customers, so we will always have an on-prem solution because of the demands we have from some of our customers. So we're always going to have that one. The other thing too is, since we are a security company, we test a lot of malware and create a lot of malware and test that, and there's no way a public cloud wants that in their cloud. So we have other reasons why we're going to need to have our own kind of internal data center to handle some of that. So, but I do think it's really, it's been helpful for me as we learn the cloud journey to be able to really have two partners, because I can compare and contrast and see which ones, where's there some benefit, where's not, how do I apply best practices to one versus the other. That's been enormously helpful as we optimize the cost. So, and cost and efficiency and the run, all of that helps by having the two deeply ingrained, so we can see how applications are performing, and it just makes it better.
Yes, so the IT applications in Atlassian, almost all of them are in, we have SaaS applications. The only areas where we have data infrastructure or Active Directory, some of the tools that we buy for monitoring, et cetera, that runs in AWS. So I would say I'm lucky to come in and inherit a platform that's like 100% cloud that way. But as far as our customers and our product is concerned, we will cater to both needs, whether you want to be on-prem behind firewall or in the cloud, though we are going big in cloud because more and more of our customers would prefer to go that way. So IT buys a lot of Atlassian products and they would love to be 100% cloud as long as we're able to meet them in terms of what they require in the cloud. So that's really the big push.
But I think it's a really good point. We talked a lot about the infrastructure piece. I'm a 67% SaaS shop, which means most of my applications are SaaS, which isn't anything to do with the infrastructure cloud. So the more and more, the only one I'm not yet is really the ERP ecosystem is still on-prem, but everything else is mostly SaaS. And that's just a huge value, agility, time, all that kind of stuff. So then you don't have to really worry about the infrastructure piece.
I'm glad you mentioned SaaS. Let's talk about the SaaS model. We've seen a number of really successful SaaS IPOs this year. The model certainly isn't new and has sort of gone through this period of sort of popular, not popular. Now clearly everyone's bullish on it on Wall Street and elsewhere. How has that transformed each of your businesses? And we'll start with you, Sheila.
Yeah, so again, what you get with a SaaS application is the upgrades, the frequency. I think about my job and what we have to do is there's always more demand than supply in IT. Everyone wants, all the demand is big and we never have enough funding to do everything that everyone wants. So when I look to a SaaS provider that I can get, and I have to distinguish between what's core versus context, what we deliver. And when I can go buy off-the-shelf commercially available software that they do the upgrades, they keep it current, they do all that, then that's just perfect. That's gold. So we don't have to worry about upgrading that. We don't have to worry about doing all of the new enhancements and so just the sheer value of SaaS in that aspect is great. The other, of course, then there's the infrastructure positivity too. You don't run the infrastructure. I will say that I've learned over the last 3 or 4 years that you have to get really good at negotiating a SaaS contract. Because I do think, if not, there's ways that those contracts are designed that you could spend a lot of money without necessarily knowing so. So there's a lot of complexity in a SaaS contract, and we've learned a lot of do's and don'ts, and I would make sure that as you go into SaaS, you understand some of those do's and don'ts and what you're really committing to and what you're not committing to. And then, of course, from my view of security, at first we thought all these SaaS applications weren't secure, but now you look at Salesforce and Box and Office 365, and you look at any one of them, and they're as secure as what you would do, if not in some cases more secure than you would do in your own current IT organization. So I think all the risks and fears have changed, and I would just say the only real risk of SaaS is to size your organization appropriately, number of seats and all that, and really spend some time analyzing the contract and negotiating.
Yep, so I think SaaS has been critical in kind of moving the IT and IT leadership function to the front of the company. Like a couple of decades ago, you said you'd imagine someone in a data center somewhere in a closet pulling wire. Today, when you talk about IT, we talk about business transformation or revenue enablers. What it's allowed, I think, IT to do is focus more on our customers, whether they are our employees or our business functions, and really start anchoring on business outcomes. We were such, known to be such technologists that we weren't known to be thought leaders and focus, people that could come to the front of the company and help drive business outcomes. And I think that's been a huge, side benefit, I would say, for IT to leverage SaaS and really have a seat at the table.
Now, are traditional applications that you buy and install yourselves, are they going away eventually, like email?
Is email going away?
Well, theoretically.
We said we'd like for it to. I thought both of us said, yeah, sure. I think Sheila once wanted it gone 8 years ago. I want it gone now. I think we are definitely, but I think there's still, if you look at our companies and you look at the talent that's coming into the company new, you'll see that they're more comfortable with products such as Slack than folks that might have been here longer. So we have to kind of balance what the employees need. So I don't think we would take it away, But as you start seeing use diminish over time, you'll probably, it'll go away on its own.
Here's what I would say to that question is I think it's still really fragmented about all the applications one needs in an enterprise to support an enterprise of $5 million or whatever that is. Like there's a lot of applications. And regardless of if it's a SaaS application or not, you still have to think about the negotiation, the licensing costs, the maintenance and all that. So what I like to do is I like to think about platforms. I want to make big bets on certain platforms and now we're seeing, so Salesforce and Oracle are platforms. And so we're seeing each of those platforms extend to add more capabilities. To me, that's much more exciting than to add 20 more apps. I'm trying to reduce the number of applications and trying to reduce it while still meeting the demands of the company, but it's great if the platform just naturally adds more capabilities to it because it makes that platform that I already own and invested in distributed richer.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to, Sheila, what you said about sort of historically, the role of CIOs and how they saw IT. Mm-hmm. Clearly, IT transformation has made the job of a CIO easier in some ways, but also harder in other ways because I would imagine you're getting bombarded with pitches about we're going to transform your IT. And so I wonder if each of you could just talk a little bit about how do you sift through all the noise and how do you find out what really is good and what's not?
Yeah, so I would say a couple things on that. I actually think the job of the CIO is relatively the same job as it was 20 years ago. We have an obligation and a responsibility to protect and secure and now provide value out of our deepest assets in the company. The challenge is years ago it was the four walls, a contained private data center, monolithic applications was all contained. Today it's IoT, it's mobile devices, it's remote workers, it's I want to work anywhere I am, which means work is a verb and not a noun. I don't have to go to the place, I can work whatever, and I want to be connected, and I want to have all my information at my fingertips wherever I am, even if I'm on the soccer field watching my kids. And oh, by the way, you got to make all that secure. So you're now having to do the same job in a very, very, very distributed way across the globe, across all your employees, partners, and customers. And oh, by the way, partners and customers want to interact with you in that same automated way and automated fashion. So I just think the job is much more hard. And then I'm going to layer on the compliance, GDPR, privacy, and all the rules, and more audits, all of that. So it's much more difficult than it was historically, I think. Having said that, I think that you got to figure out, again, what Archana said was so important. Technology for technology's sake is not what the CIO should be doing. I have limited resources to deliver results for the company. And so aligning with the strategy of the company and aligning what the company wants to do, you got to always have your run function. You got to keep the place running and operating. But the dollars that you're allowed to go make an impact have to be vetted, decided, prioritized, and agreed to by the organization, and that becomes the priority for the work. Then all of a sudden you can have all these other ideas that come up during the course of the year, and I wouldn't suggest you say no to them, but what I do is I put them in a bucket and we coordinate an annual hackathon for my team, so I think it's fun. I have a big team in Pune. In this year's hackathon, I said, I don't care what ideas we come up with, because they can come up with their ideas themselves, and they create, I think I have 65 ideas right now, as long as every single one of them has an AI component. Because I want the IT team to understand and think, where could we use IT, within IT, for IT, but for the business? So why not take all those ideas, potentially technology, and put it into this hackathon? So we're doing the hackathon at the same time we're kind of educating ourselves on AI. So it sounds weird, but it's kind of like controlled chaos. So I'm trying to make some controlness of the chaos, but while learning.
So I keep repeating the same thing here, right? Business outcomes are more important than technology. As IT leaders, I think we need to just anchor on that. If we anchor on that, you're right, things have gotten distributed, disparate, complex. There's a lot that comes to us from our customers, internal, external, on what they would like to see us do. The capacity needs are crazy, but if you anchor on the value of what we're doing, a lot of times as technologists we get bright shiny objects, right? Let's just go do this new technology, so implement it, and we get carried away. I remember when I first came to IT, I didn't grow up in IT. I was actually in product engineering team at Cisco. When I first came to IT, Cisco at that time was running at about 20 billion a year, so about 6 billion a year in every quarter. My first job in IT was to run logistics IT team and close our books. And we had a major issue. Orders are getting stuck, 4 hours to go. You got to close the books. in 4 hours and orders are getting stuck. So my team, smartest IT engineers I've ever worked with, they're all coming up with new ideas. We can run this script, we can run, re-engineer this, change this. And it felt like chaos to me. And I remember bringing in a business leader to that conversation, and I'd never forget that question she asked me. She said, what is the revenue impact? We hadn't even done that. We hadn't looked. I mean, looked, it was $1 million. $1 million in a $6 million quarter. And her response was, do nothing. Let's finish this quarter, and we can put the fix later, right? Sometimes the best solution is to do nothing, no matter how amazing talent you have. Sometimes that is the best solution, and as IT leaders, we need to really put a business lens on everything that comes at us first before we apply. We are good at technology. That's our baseline. That's what we are good at. We should take it for granted. The other thing I would say is hire amazing talent. Like if you, as an IT leader, if you anchor on business outcomes and you go get the best talent that you can get, people that love being challenged, people that are curious, people that will figure things out and empower them to do their best work within the organization, then you're going to set yourself up for success.
Yeah, I like that. Sometimes the best move is to do nothing. It's kind of resonant, and it applies to a lot of different situations. There used to be a saying, there still is a saying maybe, that no one ever got fired for buying Cisco, or no one ever got fired from buying IBM. Is there a modern day equivalent of that?
If there is, it changes every month. I don't know. I can think of one that I would say, most CIOs, if I talk to today, are Oracle, Salesforce, Slack shops. There's probably a set of applications that are prevalent among Fortune 500 and most large enterprises today, but I think the competition for every one of them, today, no company, no matter how large they are, can afford to get complacent.
Yeah, I don't even think I agree with the statement, because I don't think I know of anyone that got fired because they chose a certain technology. I think it's more about other things and other reasons. So knowing that with the choice and plethora and proof of concepts and all that stuff, that I go back to perfection isn't possible. So if you get whatever technology you purchase and you learn halfway through the process that there's some configuration that's wrong or you need to make it better, you're gonna adjust. We all adjust now in real time. So I don't think that that's even a statement that people get fired because they chose a certain technology.
Great. Well, I wanted to sort of step back from this topic, and if each of you could just talk about the hardest IT project that you've ever been involved with. And I think I know yours. I read your bio, and you were in charge of the separation of Veritas and Symantec's IT.
Right.
So maybe if you could just talk a little bit about scale of 1 to 10, how hard was that?
Oh my God, it's like 25 or something. I'm sorry, I'm like way off the scale. Actually, I worked for Sheila.
I was going to say, when you hire best talent, you hire them twice.
Thank you. Yeah, I came to work for Sheila at Symantec, and my job, well, my title said mergers, acquisition, and divestiture. 99.95% of my job was the divestiture. I came to run the divestiture at Veritas, and that was probably the hardest thing I've done. I think the reason was, I worked for Sheila. She had an amazing IT team at the time. She'd hired pretty much over the last 6 months, I think, before I came on. And there was an ambition. IT had the ambition which was much higher than the ambition of the company. The company said, separate the two companies. Take 2/3 of the company this way, 1/3 of the company that way. Our ambition was do the right things and do it right. Don't set up either company to fail. Don't set up either side of the organization to fail. So we just had this higher bar for ourselves. And I think it was hard to keep all of that bar in place when you had the pressure of like, it has to be done in a year. All of this has to be done in a year. All of your applications separated, teams separated, and it all has to work on day one, and day one is October 5th. I mean, that name is like branded in my head. It was hard, and we re-implemented ERP, moved all of the applications, stood it up in a brand new data center, and did go live October 5th, 2015. I'll tell you a side story here. How many of you are in IT in the room? About 60%, 70%? Most of you probably are very familiar with what I'm telling you. When you do large implementation, there's a cutover process. For the Veritas Symantec separation, it was a 5-day cutover. And I remember all of the leadership came by, stopped by with ice cream and stuff, and there were about a couple hundred of us that knew we were not going home for 5 days. And I remember talking to my EA at that time, and I said, people aren't going to go home, and it's 5 days, and we need to bring in some mattresses and drop it into a room, so if people want to crash, there's some place to do that. I crashed after about 12 hours the first day. And just imagine, I wake up, there's a strange guy sleeping on the mattress next to me. And I'm like, God, I'm too old for this. I went and found my EA and said, okay, separate room for boys and girls. But all jokes aside, it was a hard thing to do. But I think you kind of get that high when you're in like day 3, day 4, when you see it. You see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you're like getting the confidence that, shit, this didn't feel like it could be done, but I think we're going to pull it off. And we did. Day 1, 7,000 employees walked into the building right across the street from Symantec. Separate network, separate laptops, completely separated companies, separate applications on a separated infrastructure, which I thought was pretty amazing. So that was probably the hardest thing I've done, but also, and people call me crazy for saying this, the most fun.
Yeah, I don't know why I'd use the word fun, but no, so a couple things I want to say. That one of the things we learned in this process, so I've now done 9 acquisitions and 2 divestitures at Symantec in 5 years, all in the context of us creating this platform for cybersecurity, the integrated cybersecurity defense platform, so it's all been the right decisions. But I will say that during something like this, I do think a divestiture is at least 10 times harder than an acquisition. And the reason I finally figured out why, it's because you got to follow the money. When you do an acquisition, you and I agree, and we sign the checks, I've acquired it, and now it's up to IT whenever we want to integrate the company, and we can take our time and decide the ordering and the sequencing, and you can plan it. It's all kind of in the 4 walls of your company. A divestiture is almost like, now I'm 28 years married, so I don't really know what divorce is like, but a divestiture is a divorce. And we have to keep it amicable for the kids, right, for the company that's splitting. And oh, by the way, nobody gets paid. What Archana didn't mention is the only stipulation and contingency on an $8.5 billion deal, so you know all the bankers, and there's a lot of people and a lot of money involved. The only stipulation for the deal to go through was, did it operationally separate? No pressure. So anyway, so I would say that we learned a ton. I actually learned more about circuits in third world countries than I care to know. I could give a lesson in a class on it, because once you separate buildings and you get to the circuit, you have to get the circuits done in 2 separate buildings, and oh my God, siestas in Italy and Spain and all this stuff that happened over the summer, and you get the circuits delivered, and then through embargo and all sorts of stuff, and then there's no one there to implement it, because you can't go to the typical circuit providers. You got to go to these third-party ones who are not on vacation. Anyway, so third world circuits, I know, circuits in third world countries are like such a learning and a lesson that have been fascinating to understand. So that was enormous activity and enormous, and in some ways just a huge learning experience, and super, super stressful. So I would say to the question is, in addition to that, is just, we've had a lot of leadership change. So we talked a little bit about culture, and at Symantec we've had 3 or 4 CEOs in the last 5 years. And for all the right reasons, for all the right purposes as the company evolves. But it's hard when you change leadership, because leadership is the one that's driving the culture, and whether they're, the right CEO at the right time and all that, they're going to come in with their priorities, their focus. Each of us are going to come in with our different expectations, values, and how you work is going to be different. And so being able to pivot on that as frequently as we have, while still running the company and still driving the 9 acquisitions and 2 divestitures and all the other things that we've done, has been, I would say, I always say when things are really, really, really hard and difficult is where you grow the most, whether you want to or don't. And so being able to have different leaders in such a short period of time with very different periods of focus while still maintaining the IT organization and delivering what we need to deliver, I think has been quite challenging.
Well, I think that's all the time we have, so I just want to thank you, Sheila and Archana, for taking part.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.